In DC, for DC. DC Radio, 96.3 HD4 and DCRadio.gov.
Thank you, deep voice person with a funky backbeat. Indeed, this is not a council hearing, this is hearing the council. You can't have a government without a council, so you can't have a government radio station without a council show. This is it. We are not coming to you from the train track enclosed nerve center like we normally do. We're coming to you from my home and the council members. Never expected to say that. I'm Josh Gibson, Director of Communications for the council. You may also know me as the council's voice on social media at Council of DC. Listeners, this is a special round of hearing the council interviews, one we never expected to have to do and hope we'll never have to repeat in the future. This is a special COVID edition of Hearing the Council. Without any further ado, let me introduce our guest today, Ward 7 Council Member Vince Gray. Thanks for coming, Councilor. Well, not coming. Thanks for being with us, Council Member.
Thank you, Josh. I just wanted to commend you again for the job you do with this. You've helped put this whole thing together. We created this radio station approach when I was the mayor. I'm glad to see that it's come to fruition, and I'm glad to see you doing it. I've enjoyed being on your show with you each time I've been here.
Appreciate it. Just before we went live, I was telling you or reminding you that a year ago you were on the show and you faced terrible traffic trying to get out to the DC radio studio off New York Avenue because it was Memorial Day weekend 2019, and you got stuck in the beach traffic of folks heading to the beach. And we were just commenting how much has changed to this upcoming Memorial Day weekend. That's
exactly right, Josh. And that was a nightmare trying to get to your show that day, but we finally got there.
Yeah, I'm a lesser person would have given up and said it's not that big of a deal, but I appreciate your diligence.
Well, if I make a commitment, I try to adhere to it or live up to it, and I made a commitment to you, and I wanted to make sure we did it right.
I'm glad we did. So let's talk COVID. It's if only we had a council member who has a background in health and has been talking nonstop about hospitals for the better part of a decade. You know anyone who fits that description?
I think I might be able to come up with somebody, Josh. You give me a few names and I might be able to figure it out.
Okay. Well, I mean, all seriousness, you are from a health background, and you have been talking about health disparities in the city, racial and geographic health disparities, going back a very long time. Yeah. So talk about how you might be experiencing the COVID response in a way that's very specific to your background and your causes you've been fighting for.
Well, what's interesting is, and I did an op-ed piece for one of our local papers about this issue, and that is, people have raised the question about the number of health disparities that have appeared, among Black and brown people. And my question was, so what's new? I mean, we've been having this issue for years and years and years. So if people are finally discovering it, where have they been? So if this helps to provide the catalytic agent that we need to be able to get to the next place, then I'm fine with it. So we've seen, large numbers of people who have contracted the virus, and the number of deaths. I mean, we're talking about number of positive cases in the District of Columbia being well over 7,000 at this stage, and then the number of deaths were over 400. No one, saw this coming. Although there are those who would argue that the White House should have seen this coming and didn't respond to the clues, the cues that we had before us, and that well may be true. But for me, this has been an incredible lesson in how we need to make sure we care for people. It's one of the reasons why I've been working so hard, as you alluded to, in trying to get us to have a real healthcare system, especially on the east end of the city, where Wards 7 and 8 are part of that, geography, and where it represents a quarter of the population of the District of Columbia. 7 and 8 are 25%. of the population that we have in the city. And we haven't properly paid attention to that over the years. We've had lots of health problems that people have experienced, and we could have done better. And we have a chance to do better now. I'm really pleased with the mayor having come forward in her budget with the focus on a real healthcare system. That's what we need to focus on, not just the hospital, all those services that are necessary to be able to help people get to a good place and then stay at a good place once they get there. So I'm excited about the opportunity that we have before us. It's long overdue. We need to do this now, and we need to do it as quickly as we possibly can. If you want to talk about some of the details of that, I'll be happy to do that, Josh. But we're talking about now a hospital being built on the grounds of St. Elizabeth's, but also adding to it ambulatory care, adding to it urgent care centers. There's never been, amazingly, an urgent care center in either of Ward 7 or Ward 8, for that matter. And we have a chance to do something about that at this stage. We'd actually worked, Josh, with an organization, MBI, which is very committed to healthcare. They went out and bought a building. They bought a building at the intersection of Nannie Helen Burroughs and Division Avenue in Ward 7. And they are working now to get open what could be the first urgent care center in the history of Ward 7. I'm hopeful that we get this done, and then we build on that. We recognize all the other things that need to be done, and then really build on that to demonstrate to people that we deeply care about the people who live in Ward 7 in particular, and in Ward 8 to create a system that just doesn't exist at this point. So it is an exciting moment for the people of the District of Columbia, an exciting moment for the people of Ward 7, Ward 8. Again, just in terms of numbers, let's look at the reality that we have, 170,000 people, 160,000 people at least, collectively in Ward 7 and Ward 8. And, if we ever really want to be a real city, and those are the kinds of things that we have got to take care of. It's something I feel deeply about, and I'm glad to see that the mayor has stepped forward in her budget and is advancing what I think will be some real solutions to the healthcare challenges that are faced by all the people who live in Ward 7 and live in Ward 8. So you got me started now. And I'm delighted to be able to talk about it, and I'll be happy to talk about it ad nauseum if you wish.
Well, we'll try to stop just short of the ad nauseum part. But I mean, I think, folks, it may be obvious to some, but it's worth stating out explicitly that COVID is the canary in the coal mine, that we're tragically losing hundreds of people, but we're losing, the virus itself is not technically racist. We're losing people to COVID because a disproportionate number of Ward 7 and 8 residents have underlying conditions like high blood pressure and diabetes, right, that weaken the body's fight against the virus. Right. So the real questions we have to ask and problems we have to solve are the reasons why folks have those conditions, aren't getting the health care they need. The food desert angle, I know you've been active on, that among the reasons that there are blood pressure problems and diabetes problems is that there's a lot of access to high sodium, high sugar food and not as much access to healthy food. Right. So, long after COVID is gone, knock on wood, as soon as possible, we're still going to have these serious problems that were unearthed by COVID that we're going to need to tackle. So how are you going to help keep a spotlight on those longer term, harder to fix topics moving forward?
Well, you put your finger on it in substantial part in terms of what you said, Josh. You look at the reality that we live in areas in 7 and 8, we live in areas where there are actually pronounced food deserts. Situations where people just don't have access to the opportunities for food to be purchased, to get food, to have it for their family. And one of the reasons for that is we just don't have the grocery stores. You look at Ward 7, we have 2 full-service grocery stores. In Ward 8, we have 1 full-service grocery store at the moment. Then you put that alongside the fact that we are making some changes. For example, you look at one ward that has 10 full-service grocery stores. When you start to add up the numbers, we have somewhere on average between 8 and 9 full-service grocery stores in every ward of the District of Columbia, except for Ward 7 and for Ward 8. So I have legislation that went through the council, was unanimously approved by the members of the council, and then was signed by the mayor, that would actually have the District of Columbia invest, the government invest in the building of grocery stores and make them available to qualified providers to be able to operate those grocery stores once they're done. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the fact that we've got now other opportunities to start to address some of these food deserts that we have, impelling us, impacting us every day. And I want to be able to look up one day and say, look, we've got 3 or 4, 5 grocery stores. In fact, we could have as many as 6 in Ward 7 alone, and then work with the other members, especially the member in Ward 8, to be able to address some of the needs that exist there and that have to be attacked. You talked about the high sodium diets and the sugar that people, the things that people eat now that may taste good to you, but it's not good for you. And we want to be able to address those kinds of things with attacking this food desert problem that we have. And frankly, we can have all the healthcare systems we want to, but unless we recognize the inextricable relationship between eating and healthcare outcomes, we'll never get the answers that we are entitled to. And I want to make sure that we address that as effectively as we can. And again, not to be repetitive, but the health, the deserts, the oasis that exist now, food deserts, we got a lot of those, and the lack of a healthcare system in some areas of our city.
Now, I've been in D.C. long enough to remember back prior to the Whole Foods opening in Logan Circle.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that the company was very, very reticent to open there. In fact, this is before social media days. There was a significant lobbying campaign that neighborhood undertook. Lo and behold, they opened the store, and from day one, it was gangbusters. I think it's like literally one of the most profitable stores nationwide for the company.
It is.
Do you think there's enough pent-up demand in Ward 7 and 8 that when the grocery stores do come there, there'll be a similar success story?
I do, Josh. I think there's also a lot of resources that exist in 7 and 8 that people just don't fully recognize or acknowledge at this point. There's a lot of disposable income, especially say Ward 7. There's a lot of disposable income in areas of Ward 7. We have an area of 7, it's downtown Ward 7, and we've got some folks, Cedar Realty, that we've been working with. They now own the East River Shopping Center, and we're glad that they've moved in and purchased the shopping center. They've purchased the Senator Realty Senator shopping area land across the street, and we're hoping that they're going to expand that as well. So yes, I think there is pent up demand. I think there's resources to be able to for people to be able to spend money in our own city. And, why do we want to spend money outside the city? Those tax dollars then will be going to Northern Virginia or Prince George's County or Montgomery County or whatever. Let's keep those tax dollars home by investing ourselves in these kinds of services so that people will have them available to themselves. I hardly support that. I do believe that we can do it. And what a great thing to be able to say that we've got healthcare system and we've got, food opportunities available to folks. One of the things I was happy about too, Josh, was just recently we had Safeway, which actually came out. We worked hard with Safeway from the very beginning of my return to the council. And because I went into the stores in the East River Shopping Center and one in Good Hope Marketplace off of Alabama Avenue, and looked at the conditions there, and I said, listen, we got to do something about this. And we had the media that went out with us. We should have had you going out there with us to do something with us. So, but we had the media that was out there with us. They did some TV clippings and did a story on TV, on the TV news about that. And so it got focused on the needs that exist. And we need to continue to focus on those kinds of things. And to wit, it led us to the point where we asked Safeway to help us with some of the food needs that people had during this COVID-19 epidemic. And Safeway stepped up. They said, listen, we're going to make a commitment. We will make sure that all of our shelves in 2 stores in Ward 7, will be fully stocked during the entire time. In addition to that, they gave us $16,000 worth of non-perishable food that we were able to give away to 2 of our nonprofit organizations that work with us to get that food out to people who need to be able to eat in a healthy way. And it was a nice gesture by Safeway. But, more can do that too. There are more out here who can do the same kind of thing.
Now, let me ask you this, again, going back to the Logan Circle Whole Foods analogy. Fast forward a few years, pretend that a number of grocery stores have opened. What are you going to do to avoid the Logan Circle situation that followed, where it was a real amplifier for gentrification in that area? That store opening kind of marked a shift in that neighborhood for the better from a food sense, but more complicated impact in terms of gentrification. So what, like you said, Ward 7 and 8 that has a fully functioning health sector and a number of grocery stores, what will prevent that from gentrifying that section of the city?
I think, frankly, Josh, it's got to be a situation in which we recognize the continuing need for affordable housing in the District of Columbia, so that people can feel like they can continue to live in certain areas, that they don't start to run off somewhere else because the housing that's located, let's say, in 7 and 8 is now unaffordable to them. So, and one of the ways to do that is to continue to invest in making housing affordable. For example, the mayor has said she wants to build 36,000 new units of housing. And that's going to take money, obviously. It's going to take investment. And so we need to do that so that people can afford to live in areas. One of the areas that's really hot now, that's moving quickly, is Deanwood. Increasingly large numbers of people who live in Deanwood at this stage. Somebody referred to Deanwood as the new Brookland. And I said, well, I don't know if I liken it to that, but we want to be able to have as much housing as affordable to people as possible. And at this stage of the game, the only way to do that is with some of the investments that are being made. When I was mayor, I was the first mayor ever to started investing $100 million a year in affordable housing. And the first year we did $100 million. And the second year we did $287 million. And the current mayor, Mayor Bowser, has continued on this pathway. And so I think if we want to be able to ensure that we make places, the places are available to people who we want to have the opportunity to live there, should they want to live there, you got to keep it affordable. I support continuing our efforts around rent control because people don't own, they might like to own it, or maybe they don't want to own it. But if they don't want to own it, we should be investing in keeping the rents affordable to people. And that means building housing that's affordable to people too. We have a development that's been built right at Minnesota Avenue and East Capitol Street in Ward 7. And the housing that's been built there is rental housing that is affordable. And we've got to continue to do those kinds of things if we really want to allow people to have the opportunity to stay where they want to be. And for me, that would be staying in the District of Columbia.
Okay, let's, you've mentioned it a couple of times, the new budget the mayor proposed. We are facing, won't call it an unprecedented situation, but an unpleasant situation where because of falling revenue, we need to cut, roughly $750 million from the current fiscal year, ongoing fiscal year that's already half over, and a similar amount from next fiscal year, starting October 1st. In your time on the council and mayor, how daunting of a budget situation is this? How does it rank in terms of bad spots we've been in budget-wise?
Well, frankly, Josh, I've never seen anything like this, and I hope, heavens, I don't want to see another one like this. As you put it, we lost revenue, $722 million in revenue in a matter of 3 months, 4 months. And we're going to face this to a lesser or greater extent as we go forward in the future. So it is absolutely unprecedented. And I don't know, I've looked at the mayor's budget. I've looked at it somewhat in a cursory fashion because we just got it in earnest day before yesterday, 2 days ago. And I want to obviously work now to try to do a thorough analysis of what's being requested moving forward. But there are some cuts that are in there, and we should have expected that. One of the things that is really good, though, and I'm pleased with this, is that you look at our reserves. We have reserves that have been set aside in the bank. Let's put that to allow for a rainy day. And boy, is it raining now. This is a rainy day, to say the least. But we had reserves that we could turn to be able to protect us against something untoward like this happening. And that's one of the things that's protected us so far in getting through this difficult situation. And by the way, it isn't just the District of Columbia. Every area of the nation is facing this. And to a lesser or greater extent, we'll have to face the cuts as well. But I have not seen in this budget yet the level of cuts that I thought were likely to occur. And I give the mayor credit for that. The council now is going to have to do the hard work, the heavy lifting of getting this budget to a point where we can feel comfortable that it continues to reflect the priorities of the city. I was talking to somebody earlier today. We were talking about what the kinds of things that need to be done. And I think we got to, as an institution, all 12 and 13th, I guess, but we have to set some priorities. We have to set, some principles in place to say, here's what we think are the important things for the city, like education. We've got to continue to invest in education, and I appreciate the fact that she now has included an increase of 3%. She talked about doing 4% earlier, which would have been a nice investment, but even 3%, that's still an increase in education. And if we don't invest in education for our children and our families, then it's a hopeless set of circumstances. So we've got to set some priorities, and it would include education, and it certainly would include healthcare, because as we've talked about already, the important situation that we have, especially in some areas of the city. If we don't invest, now, it's almost the old adage, you pay me now or you pay me later. And I'd rather not pay any more later than we have to, because we're making the investments now in healthcare. So it's going to call for each one of us as a council member to come together as a group to look at those things that we consider to be so important, and say we're committed to these investments for the future, of our city.
Yeah, I mean, we started off by talking about how much things have changed in a year. From a budget standpoint, very recently the council was talking about what to do with surpluses. Talk of providing a metro subsidy to every resident of the district, surplus money going to violence interruption. And I know you have some set-asides on programs that you've fought for, Birth to 3, and like you were mentioning, grocery stores east of the river. Where what is the status of those programs? Do those go back, unfortunately, for a while to being wish list, or is there still a true hope in the short term that something will come of those?
Well, unfortunately, I think that they will, to some extent, recede into the background right now, but the needs won't recede at all. They will continue to face us. As you indicated already, Josh, there are some things that I had, helped to create legislation where we'd set aside some money. For example, a lot of people don't follow the concept of PAYGO. It's kind of a simple term where you say, well, we pay for this as we go along. And we had done that with our grocery store needs that would have the city investing in the construction of grocery stores. And we know that after the last audit, there was enough money there that had was set aside in the reserves to be able to make these investments. The problem for us is that as that happened, and we had, by the way, what is tantamount to $323 million in reserves that could have been set aside for these purposes. Half of the money would have gone to affordable housing, and the other half should have gone to building grocery stores for our people. So that money is largely gone. It's gone now, and we'll have to look how we start to rebuild those reserves. So as much as I would love to say that the money is still there, that the opportunity is before us, it is not at this point. On the other hand, we do have money that's been set aside to some extent for reserves in the District of Columbia, which is shocking given the fact how much money we've lost along the way. So it isn't as if every opportunity has now disappeared to be able to set aside some money as we go forward. But it has substantially reduced. But we've got some opportunities now to keep the momentum going, and we need to work to do that. But again, not to be repetitive, but we need to set some priorities and say these are the things that are most important to us right now. And as much as we would like to invest in these other things, we're going to have to set that aside until we start to rebuild the kinds of reserve opportunities that we've had in the past.
Yeah, I was noticing, I think just yesterday, I won't name the person, but one of our Wilson Building journalists, a member of our Wilson Building Journalist Corps, was celebrating their child turning 3 because they kick into free daycare from that point on, and just thinking that's such an odd, I can't imagine any other country or any other, I know we're lucky to have what we have for kids 3 and up, but that you're on the hook for your kid for daycare from birth through 3, and the second they turn 3, it's like you have a mortgage lifted off your shoulders.
Yeah.
And we had a chance to kill that invented turning 3 and saving thousands of dollars date and push it back to 0. But now with the budget situation, that's going to be more of a challenge.
It certainly is, Josh. It's going to be more of a challenge, and not making those investments in the very youngest of our citizens is just ill-advised. I did the legislation that created a universal pre-kindergarten in the city, and we are still the only jurisdiction in America that has a universal pre-kindergarten, and I suspect other jurisdictions now are going to recede somewhat as well because they're not going to have the resources to make these investments at all. We're going to continue, of course, our pre-kindergarten programs. But one of the things, you just touched on it, one of the things that's hugely important to me is legislation I was able to get passed, and that is creating universal birth to 3 services so that the very youngest of our children would have a chance to be in programs, to be in developmental programs that would lead them and their families to the next place. We still are hopeful that the revenue that we had set aside for the gambling, I would call it the wagering revenue that we had set aside, we expect that to come back in 2024. It's 50% of it is supposed to go to the NEAR Act, and then 50% of the money is supposed to go to the Birth to Three legislation, which I've done. We've got to continue to make those investments. That is our future. And I don't want to be trite, but it really is our future. And we can already see the results of our children who have gone through the pre-kindergarten programs. I don't know if you and I have had a chance to talk about it at all, but we had a hearing at the council with some very young children who came down and testified before the Education Committee. And one of the things that we celebrated during that period, this was the information that came to us right around Thanksgiving, just before Thanksgiving of this past year, because we were waiting for these test scores to come before us. And I was so anxious to see those test scores because it was the first cohort of children who had gone through the pre-kindergarten program. They were now 8th graders. And what I wanted to see is how well they had done. And their scores were phenomenal. We were so proud of what those kids had done. And it makes such a hugely important case for why the investment in early childhood education is so essential. It makes the difference in whether our kids really are learning and benefiting from their education, and to what extent they are, and being able to the families can look back on the investments being made now through their tax dollars and tax dollars of others to be able to support these kinds of investments in early childhood education. So we need to continue to do that. We need to continue to make sure we are investing in the very youngest, the pre-kindergarten, and we're going to continue to do that. I was afraid that we might be looking at cuts there, but we're not, thankfully. And apparently in this budget, the mayor is proposing to add more early childhood education seats for the very youngest, those who are birth up to 3. So I hope we can do it. But that's where we start to make the case for here are the things that are so important to us, and here's how we're going to continue. Here's how and why we're going to continue to do these things.
Right. And with the early childhood education stuff, it may be obvious, but folks don't always say it out loud. In addition to benefiting the child for their whole life, if the kid is in childcare, that frees up the parents for whatever it is, employment, further education, better healthcare for themselves, just because they have the literal time in their day to accomplish that stuff. So it really is a kind of a 2-for-1 scenario. There's a lot of benefits to the other family members in addition to the kid growing up wiser and more effective their whole life.
You know, I had an interesting experience. It's been now close to a year where I went to a meeting in a charter school. Wasn't I was there for several purposes, but when I walked out of the meeting, I walked outside of the building, and this very young mother came out with 2 very young kids in tow. I think they were probably 3 and at most 4, the 2 of them. I just stopped and I said, "Can I speak to you for a minute?" And she said, "Sure." I said, "I would appreciate the opportunity just to say thank you for what you're doing." I said, "You have taken the opportunity to make sure your kids got to school today. And what a wonderful benefit they are deriving from this, because you have taken them to school. You've sent a powerful message to them about how important their education is. And frankly, she is now benefiting from them being in school. I don't know whether she worked or didn't work or what the case may be, but I saw that she had taken the time to invest in her very young children to get them to an education that day. And what a wonderful opportunity it created for those children. And frankly, what you were talking about for this family who now didn't have the burden of having to all day long, care for those children because they were in an organized education program that day. And, as we've gone through this pandemic, we've seen how many kids have, had to be educated virtually. We're engaged in right now. And how many of those kids, have continued to be educated. I just hope that they haven't lost major chunks of the gains they've made as a result of not being in school, consistently. I mean, these kids have they've been educated on a virtual basis. They have had, computer generated lesson plans made available to them, and who knows what's going to happen in the future. I just saw yesterday some proposals that would have kids, maybe for the next year, going one day a week and getting virtual education otherwise, or, their families having to make, educational opportunities available to them in their own home. So who knows what we're going to have to resort to in the future, but it should not be to the sacrifice of our children's growth and development. That's something that is just not negotiable to me.
Definitely. So we're starting to run short on time. I'm going to ask you a question. I'll be listening for your answer, but while you're answering, I'm going to quickly look on my phone because we're live on Facebook to just see if we got any quick questions in from Facebook users. But the question I'm going to ask you that you can answer while I'm doing all that is, how are you personally experiencing COVID and the stay-at-home order? You're a person who's used to going to meetings a day and events at night and community picnics, and how are you handling it? Is there any relief to it that you're not on the treadmill quite as much, or is it all just frustration and you can't be living the life you've been accustomed to for 2 or 3 decades?
Well, it is frustrating. I can't deny that. It is not fun to be. The days start to run together. You forget, is this Wednesday? Is this Friday? Is this Saturday? What day is this? And that is really frustrating to have to deal with. But we have continued to work hard. My wife is, she has her own career. She owns and operates a school for children with emotional disorders, and she's great at it. But at the same time, it means that we work hard to try to support one another in these situations. So it's not fun, not going into the Wilson Building every day or going to the various and sundry meetings that I typically go to. And also, I have to remember this too, Josh, that I've been in the middle of a campaign, and it's very frustrating to try to run a campaign during this COVID-19 experience. You can't go to the number of meetings that you normally go to. You can't go to the number of forums. So many forums have been conducted as Zoom experiences, just like we're doing right now. So I can't say it's been fun, but we continue to work as hard as we can to continue to do the business of our citizens.
So only one question has come in on Facebook, a number of comments, but one question, and it's very obscure, so feel free to tap out on this if you don't have an answer. But the question is, what are the procedural advantages of having a committee of the whole? And why would you not just have 3 votes in legislative meetings instead of having the committee of the whole pronounce legislation as ready for the council's consideration, and then the council taking 2 votes? I guess that's probably a Robert's Rules of Order question. Precedes the council's existence by a while, but if you want to touch in as a former council chair, have at it.
Well, it's a great question, and I wouldn't call it obscure at all. I call it as an excellent question from somebody who's obviously paying attention to what goes on in the Wilson Building environs every day. So, it brings all the members together, not necessarily I won't say as a decision-making body, because it is decision-making in the sense of whether you move forward legislation at that stage to the full council to be voted on, or have a discussion about the issues. So I think it really helps to shape the legislation that could or should be before us. I don't think there's any substitute for it. So I would not make any argument at all that would have any real substance to it that says we should just do away with the committee of the whole. It really helps you. I chair a committee. I have the health committee, as you know, and it helps me to be able to help to shape, the presentation, coming out of the health committee. I have 4 other members who are on the health committee who I'm glad they're on there. I'm glad to work with them. They've been really diligent since I've been back on the council and working with me. So when we advance legislation to the committee of the whole, I have 4 members then, including myself, who are part of the health committee. They can help to make the case for what we're trying to move forward. But it gives all the members of the committee, of the council, a stake in what's being advanced at that stage. I don't think there's any substitute for it, and I would not recommend that we in any way eliminate the committee of the whole.
Okay, let's do one final fun question. In your time at home, is there a particular food or a particular song or a musical group that has helped to get you through your time at home? Well,
the one thing that I've done, which is unusual for me, is that my wife is a great cook, and she has made sure that we do a couple of things. One, that we have dinner, which I'm not good at that, to tell you the truth. I'm usually out of somebody's meeting or some group is having something, so I'm out doing those things. So we've done that. But we also take the opportunity during that dinner hour to enjoy a show that we watch, and that is Jeopardy. We watch Jeopardy every evening at this point. So I hope that, I guess it's really up to me whether we lose that opportunity in the future or not, but I don't want to lose it because it really is a great opportunity for me and for her, because she has a very demanding career also in serving children every day. So we'll have to discipline ourselves to make sure we continue to do those kinds of things. So not so much a song, but I say an opportunity to do something that we otherwise might not do. And she has these other shows that she watches too, which I don't pay a lot of attention to, like The Voice, The Masked Singer, and that sort of thing. I had never paid attention to those shows before now. So I've watched those periodically. So I'm probably doing some things, Josh, that I wouldn't be doing otherwise. So I'm getting in some things that have helped to replace what I would be doing in the Wilson Building or some other meeting had been doing heretofore.
What is your favorite dish your wife makes?
Well, she's pretty good at spaghetti. I guess it's not really hard to make spaghetti, but she does a great job with the sauce. We had the sausage and the meat sauce yesterday. So that
good to me.
Yeah,
I had lunch, so I'm in. I'll be right there.
Josh, we'd love to have you.
All right. Well, unfortunately, council member, we're out of time. Thank you so much for taking the time out from your home. Mm-hmm. And I'd just like to say to any new listeners who might be joining us, because we're on Facebook, you can subscribe to our podcast on SoundCloud or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again, listeners, for joining us. Tune in again next time. We're at DC Radio at 96.3 on your HD4 dial or at dcradio.gov. I'm Josh Gibson, and this is not a council hearing. This is Hearing the Council. Thank you very much, Councilmember Gray.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me again, and I look forward to coming back whenever you will have me.
See you in person eventually.
All righty. And hopefully not in the traffic.
Yeah, exactly. Take care.
In DC, for DC, DC Radio, 96.3 HD4 and dcradio.gov.